They say the best revenge is living well, but sometimes the best revenge is standing at an altar in front of 200 guests and reading your cheating fiancé's text messages instead of wedding vows. Sometimes the best revenge is watching the color drain from his face as his dirty secrets spill out through the church's sound system for everyone he's ever known to hear. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. 3 weeks before what should have been the happiest day of my life became the most satisfying. I never thought I was the type of person capable of revenge. I was Emma, the peacekeeper, the one who avoided confrontation at all costs. I was the woman who said, "It's fine," when it definitely wasn't fine, who swallowed her anger and turned it inward instead of letting it explode outward where it belonged. I was the woman who was about to marry Derek Sullivan, the man I'd been with for 4 years, the man I thought I knew better than I knew myself. How wrong I was. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before our wedding. I remember because Tuesday was always our grocery shopping day, one of those mundane couple routines that somehow felt romantic in its ordinariness. Derek had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to shower, and it kept buzzing. Normally, I wouldn't have looked. I respected privacy, trusted completely. But the buzzing was incessant, almost frantic, and I was worried it might be an emergency. The screen lit up with each notification, and I could see it was text messages. Lots of them. From someone named Lex. My heart did this weird skip. Derek had never mentioned anyone named Lex. In 4 years together, through countless conversations about friends, co-workers, family, the name had never come up. But people have acquaintances, I told myself. People have work contacts. People have friends their partners don't know about. The phone buzzed again. "Miss you already?" My stomach dropped like I'd been pushed off a cliff. "Miss you already." Those 3 words, innocent enough on their own, but loaded with implication. Miss you already suggested they'd just been together. Miss you already suggested intimacy. Miss you already suggested this wasn't the first time. I stared at the phone, my hand hovering over it. "Don't look," the rational part of my brain whispered. "Don't be that woman. Trust your fiancé. Trust the man you're about to marry." But my hand was already moving, already swiping. Derek's phone didn't have a lock. Another sign of trust between us. Or so I'd thought. The messages opened easily, and what I saw there made my knees buckle. The conversation went back months. Months. Photos that made my cheeks burn with shame and rage. Words that Derek had never said to me, promises he'd made to someone else, intimate jokes and pet names that should have been ours alone. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night." From last Thursday. Last Thursday, when Derek had told me he was working late. "You drive me crazy in the best way." From 2 weeks ago, accompanied by a photo that left nothing to the imagination. "Wish we could just run away together." From last month, followed by "Soon, baby. Soon." I scrolled further back, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies, of working late, and guys' nights, and family obligations. 8 months of me planning our wedding, tasting cakes and picking flowers and addressing invitations, while Derek was building an entire secret life with someone else. The shower was still running. I could hear Derek singing, some song I didn't recognize. He was happy. Content. Completely unaware that his world was about to implode. I kept reading, each message a fresh stab to my heart. Lex wasn't just some random hookup. This was a relationship. They talked about their days, shared inside jokes, made plans. Derek talked to Lex the way he used to talk to me, back when we were new and everything felt electric. "I love you," Derek had written just yesterday. "I love you too," Lex had replied. "I love you," words Derek hadn't said to me in months. Words I'd been craving, waiting for, hoping would come back naturally as we got closer to the wedding. Words he was saying to someone else instead. The bathroom door opened and I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it as I tried to put it back exactly where Derek had left it. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it over his post-shower humming. "Hey babe," Derek said, walking into the kitchen with a towel around his waist, his hair still damp. He looked so normal, so familiar, so much like the man I'd fallen in love with that for a split second, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. "Ready for grocery shopping?" I stared at him. This man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks. This man who'd been living a double life for 8 months. And I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. Actually, I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady, "I'm not feeling well. Can we postpone?" Derek's face immediately shifted to concern. Fake concern, I realized now. Of course, Em. You do look a little pale. Why don't you go lie down? I'll pick up whatever we need. Translation: I'll go see Lex while you think I'm being the caring fiancé running errands. That sounds perfect, I said, and I meant it. I needed him gone. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with this information. Derek kissed my forehead, a kiss that felt like a betrayal all on its own, and got dressed. I watched him move around our bedroom, this space we'd shared for 2 years, and wondered how many times he'd gotten ready in here to go see her, how many times he'd lied to my face before walking out that door. "I love you," he said before leaving, the same words he'd texted to Lex yesterday. "Love you too," I replied automatically, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The moment the door closed behind him, I collapsed onto our bed and began to sob. Not the pretty tears of movie heroines, but ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so deep I didn't know that place existed inside me. I cried for the 8 months of lies, for the wedding that was now ruined, for the future I'd imagined that would never exist. I cried for the woman I'd been an hour ago, the woman who'd trusted completely and loved without reservation. But mostly, I cried for the fact that Derek was probably with Lex right now, probably touching her the way he used to touch me, probably telling her about his sick fiancé, while they laughed about how oblivious I was. That thought stopped my tears like a slap to the face. They'd been laughing at me. For 8 months, while I'd been excitedly planning our wedding, talking about our future, boring our friends with engagement stories, Derek and Lex had been laughing at me. The crying jag ended abruptly, replaced by something colder and more focused. I sat up, wiped my face, and began to think. I could confront Derek right now, scream and cry and demand explanations, but what would that get me? Lies, probably. Or maybe the truth, followed by some bullshit about how it just happened, and how he was confused, and how he'd choose me. But how could I ever trust him again? How could I marry someone who'd proven he could lie to my face every single day for 8 months? I could call off the wedding quietly, make up some excuse about cold feet or needing more time. Save face, save money, save everyone the drama. The mature, rational choice. Or a thought began forming in the back of my mind, dark and satisfying and completely unlike anything I'd ever considered before. Derek had humiliated me for 8 months. He'd made me an unwitting participant in his deception, had probably laughed about how easy it was to fool me. He'd stolen 8 months of my life, had me planning a wedding to a man who didn't exist. Maybe it was time he experienced some humiliation of his own. I picked up my laptop and began to research. Wedding revenge stories, legal implications, how to extract data from phones. I learned about cloud storage, about how photos and messages could be recovered even after deletion. I learned about audio equipment and projection systems. Most importantly, I learned that revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had 3 weeks to let it chill. The next morning, Derek came home with groceries and stories about his evening with the guys. He'd gotten home at 2 a.m., claiming they'd lost track of time at some sports bar. He was full of details about games they'd watched and conversations they'd had, and if I hadn't known better, I might have believed him. Derek had always been a good liar. I was just now realizing how good. "Feeling better, babe?" he asked, making me coffee with the same hands that had probably been all over Lex the night before. "Much better," I said, and I meant it. The crying was done. The shock was over. Now it was time to plan. I smiled at Derek over my coffee cup and began my own performance. I was thinking we should finalize the seating chart this weekend, and I want to go over the ceremony program one more time. Derek's face lit up with what I now recognized as relief. Poor Emma, distracted by wedding planning instead of paying attention to his secret life. "Sounds perfect. Whatever you need, whatever I need." What I needed was 3 weeks to plan the most spectacular public humiliation in wedding history. What I needed was to make sure that everyone who'd ever known Derek Sullivan would remember the day he got exactly what he deserved. Over the next few days, I became a woman I'd never been before, calculating, methodical, coldly furious. I'd smile at Derek over dinner while mentally cataloging every lie he told. I'd discuss flower arrangements while secretly planning how to access his phone when he wasn't looking. I'd talk about our future while fantasizing about his face when his secrets were revealed to everyone we knew. Derek, meanwhile, seemed happier than he'd been in months. The guilt of his double life was apparently lifted by my renewed focus on wedding planning. He was more affectionate, more attentive, more present than he'd been since the affair started. It would have been touching if it wasn't so fucking manipulative. "You seem really excited about the wedding," Derek said one evening as we reviewed vendor contracts. "More excited than you've been in a while." "You have no idea," I thought, but smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "I can't wait to marry you," I said, and that was true in its own twisted way. I couldn't wait to marry him because I couldn't wait to destroy him. That night, while Derek slept beside me, I carefully extracted his phone and began the meticulous process of documenting his betrayal. Screenshots of conversations, photos, timestamps. I created folders on my laptop organized by date and content. I was building a case like I was preparing for trial, which in a way I was. The wedding venue had an excellent sound system and projector setup. We'd specifically chosen it because Derek wanted to show a slideshow of our relationship during the reception. How perfectly ironic that the same equipment would be used to display his infidelity to everyone we knew. I researched the legal implications thoroughly. Publicly reading someone's text messages could be considered invasion of privacy, but since we lived together and the phone was frequently left in common areas, I was probably in the clear. Besides, Derek would be too humiliated to pursue legal action. His reputation would already be ruined. The last thing he'd want would be more public attention. The hardest part was maintaining the facade, acting excited about wedding planning while my heart was breaking, pretending to love the man sleeping next to me while I planned his public destruction, smiling at his family, his friends, our co-workers, all while knowing they were about to witness something that would change everything. Derek's behavior during those 3 weeks only made my resolve stronger. He continued seeing Lex, continued lying about his whereabouts, continued playing the role of excited groom-to-be. He helped me address the final batch of invitations, his handwriting cheerful and eager on envelopes that were essentially invitations to his own public execution. "I can't believe we're almost there," he said 1 week before the wedding, pulling me close as we watched TV on the couch. "In 7 days, you'll be Mrs. Sullivan." Mrs. Sullivan? The name I'd been so excited to take now sounded like a prison sentence. "I can't believe it either," I said, because that was certainly true. Derek's phone buzzed with a text. From Lex, of course. I'd learned to recognize the pattern of his responses. His body would tense slightly. He'd glance at the screen, then either ignore it or make some excuse to leave the room. This time he chose option 2. "I should call my mom back," he said, standing up with his phone. "She had some questions about the rehearsal dinner." Another lie. I'd talked to his mother that morning. She had no questions about anything. She was thrilled about the wedding, kept going on about how perfect Derek and I were together, how she'd never seen him happier. If only she knew what was making him so happy. While Derek was in the bedroom presumably talking to his mother but actually texting his girlfriend, I sat on our couch and felt the last of my love for him crystallize into something harder and more purposeful. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure that Derek Sullivan never got the chance to do this to anyone else. I began composing my wedding day speech, not the vows I'd originally written, full of love and promises and dreams of forever, but something else entirely. Something that would ensure Derek's betrayal was exposed in the most public, most humiliating way possible. The night before the wedding, Derek and I followed tradition and stayed in separate locations. He went to his best man's house for a guy's night, while I stayed in the bridal suite at the hotel near our venue. My bridesmaids threw me a little party, champagne and gossip and excited chatter about the next day. "You're so calm," my maid of honor Sarah commented as she helped me hang up my wedding dress. "I thought you'd be more nervous." "I'm not nervous at all," I said, smoothing the white silk with hands that were perfectly steady. "I know exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow." Sarah smiled. "That's the spirit. You and Derek are so perfect together. Tomorrow's going to be magical." Magical wasn't the word I'd use, but it was definitely going to be unforgettable. That night, alone in the bridal suite, I went over my plan one final time. I'd been practicing my speech for weeks, had memorized the most damning text messages, knew exactly how to operate the venue's sound system. I'd arranged for the wedding photographer to capture everything: Derek's face when he realized what was happening, the guests' reactions, the moment when 4 years of lies came crashing down in front of everyone he cared about. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Not from nerves, but from anticipation. Tomorrow, Derek would wake up thinking he was getting married to his oblivious fiancé. He'd put on his tuxedo, maybe text Lex one last time before the ceremony, maybe even feel a little guilty about deceiving me on our wedding day. But by tomorrow evening, everyone would know who Derek Sullivan really was. His family, his friends, his co-workers, our neighbors, everyone would know that he was a liar and a cheat who'd spent 8 months betraying the woman who loved him. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, it made me smile. I woke up on my wedding day feeling more clear-headed and purposeful than I had in months. This was it. This was the day Derek would finally face the consequences of his choices. My bridesmaids arrived early, full of excitement and mimosas. They did my hair and makeup, chattering about how beautiful everything would be, how lucky I was, how perfect Derek and I were together. I smiled and nodded and let them believe in the fairy tale for a few more hours. "You look absolutely radiant," Sarah said as she fastened my necklace. "Derek's going to lose his mind when he sees you." She had no idea how right she was. The venue was perfect. 200 guests exactly as we'd planned. Derek's entire family, including elderly grandparents who'd traveled across the country, his co-workers, his college friends, his childhood buddies, my family and friends too, of course. But this day was really about Derek's humiliation, and I wanted everyone who mattered to him to witness it. I could see him at the altar from the bridal suite window, looking nervous but happy in his tuxedo. Handsome as ever, the picture of a devoted groom. If I hadn't known better, I might have felt the old flutter of love and attraction. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. My father appeared at my door, ready to walk me down the aisle. "You ready, sweetheart?" I took one last look in the mirror. White dress, perfect makeup, radiant smile. The picture of a blushing bride. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I said. The music started. The doors opened, and I began my walk toward the moment I'd been planning for 3 weeks. Derek's face when he saw me was everything I could have hoped for. Pure joy, overwhelming love, complete adoration. He had tears in his eyes as I approached the altar, probably thinking about what a lucky man he was, how he was about to marry his best friend, how perfect his life was about to become. He had no idea his life was about to end. I took my place across from him, handed my bouquet to Sarah, and smiled. The officiant began the ceremony with all the traditional words about love and commitment and honesty in marriage. I listened to every word, knowing they were about to become the most bitter irony. Before we exchange vows, the officiant said, "Derek and Emma have each prepared personal words to share with each other. Derek, would you like to go first?" "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church's sound system, "I'd like to start." Derek smiled and nodded, probably thinking I was just excited to declare my love in front of everyone. The fool. I reached into my bouquet where I'd hidden my phone and pulled out the printed pages I'd prepared. Not vows, not declarations of love, something much more interesting. "Derek," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I thought long and hard about what I wanted to say to you today, about what words would best express how I feel about you, about us, about our relationship." Derek's smile was so bright it was almost blinding. He was practically glowing with happiness. And then I realized that the best way to show everyone who you really are would be to let you speak for yourself. So instead of vows, I'm going to read some of your recent text messages. The change in Derek's expression was instant and devastating. The smile vanished, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror as he realized what was about to happen. "These are messages between Derek and someone named Lex," I announced to the now silent church. "They've been having an affair for 8 months. A gasp rippled through the congregation. Derek's mother made a sound like she'd been punched. His father's face went dark with fury. "Derek, from last Tuesday, can't wait to be inside you again. Emma's working late tonight, so we'll have plenty of time." Derek lunged toward me, but his best man caught his arm. "Emma, don't..." "From last Thursday. Wish you could come to the wedding as my date instead of Emma. Would love to see the look on everyone's face." The gasps were getting louder. I could see people pulling out their phones, recording this moment that would undoubtedly end up all over social media within the hour. "From last Friday. Sometimes I think about leaving Emma for you, but the timing has to be right. After the wedding, after we're settled, maybe we can figure out how to be together publicly." Derek's face had gone completely white. "Emma, please, we can talk about this." "Oh, but we are talking about it, Derek. We're talking about it in front of everyone who matters to you, just like you and Lex talked about me." I looked out at the congregation, saw the mix of shock, anger, and fascination on their faces. There are also photos, but I think I'll spare everyone those details. Derek's grandmother was crying. His little niece was asking loudly why Uncle Derek looked so scared. His co-workers were staring with the kind of morbid fascination people reserve for car accidents. The last message was sent this morning. I continued relentlessly. Can't wait for this wedding to be over so we can go away together like we planned. Emma has no idea what's coming. I looked directly at Derek, saw the complete devastation in his eyes, and smiled. You're right, Derek. I had no idea what was coming, but now I do. And now everyone else does too. I turned to the officiant, who was staring at me with his mouth open. I don't think we'll be needing your services today after all. Then I turned back to the congregation, 200 people who'd come expecting a wedding and gotten the performance of a lifetime instead. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry you won't get to see a wedding today, but I hope you've enjoyed the show. The reception is still on, the food's already paid for, and I'd hate for it to go to waste. Derek won't be joining us, obviously. He has somewhere else he'd rather be. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. 200 people sitting in perfect, stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Then, like a dam bursting, the chaos began. Derek's mother let out a wail that echoed through the church. His father was on his feet, face purple with rage, demanding to know, "What the hell is wrong with you, son?" My own mother looked like she was about to faint, clutching my father's arm as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. But it was Derek's reaction that I savored most. He stood there in his expensive tuxedo, the one we'd picked out together, looking like his entire world had just collapsed. Which of course it had. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please, we need to talk about this privately." "Privately?" I laughed, a sound that cut through the church like a blade. "You mean like how you've been privately fucking someone else for 8 months? Like how you've been privately planning to leave me after our wedding? That kind of privately?" Derek's best man, Marcus, was tugging at his sleeve, trying to pull him away from the altar. "Dude, we need to get you out of here." But Derek wasn't moving. He was staring at me with this desperate, pleading expression, like he still thought there was some way to fix this. Some way to explain away 8 months of betrayal and lies. "How did you find out?" he asked. The question was so pathetic, so focused on the wrong thing entirely, that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Your phone," I said simply. "Last Tuesday. You left it on the counter and Lex couldn't stop texting you." "Apparently she missed you already." Derek's face crumpled. Not with remorse, I realized, but with the knowledge that he'd been caught. That his carefully constructed double life had been discovered by something as simple as forgetting to take his phone to the shower. "It's not what you think," he said, and I could see him grasping for any lie that might save him. "Lex and I were just friends. Those messages, they're taken out of context." "Derek," I interrupted, pulling out my phone, "would you like me to read the messages where you tell her you love her? Or maybe the ones where you describe in detail what you want to do to her body? Because I have screenshots of everything." The color drained from his face completely. Around us, the congregation was buzzing with whispers and shocked exclamations. I could hear Derek's teenage cousin asking his mother what having an affair meant. I could see Derek's co-workers pulling out their phones, undoubtedly texting the office gossip chain. This story would be all over town by dinner time. "Please," Derek said again, and now there were tears in his eyes. "Don't do this. We can work through this. I love you, Emma. I made a mistake, but I love you." "You love me?" I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You love me so much that you've been planning to leave me after our wedding? You love me so much that you've been laughing about how oblivious I am with your girlfriend?" Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had no answer because there was no answer. You can't love someone and betray them so completely for 8 months. You can't love someone and plan to abandon them right after tricking them into marriage. "The wedding's over," I announced to the congregation. But as I said, the reception is still on. The food's paid for, the bar's open, and the band's already set up. Think of it as a celebration of freedom instead of a wedding. I turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Derek one more time. "Oh, and Derek, you might want to call Lex. Let her know she won't have to be your dirty little secret much longer. Now everyone knows about her." Walking back down that aisle was the most satisfying moment of my life. Not because I'd destroyed Derek, though I had, but because I'd finally stood up for myself. For 4 years, I'd been the accommodating girlfriend, the understanding fiancé, the woman who said, "It's fine," when it wasn't fine at all. For 8 months, I'd been the unknowing victim of Derek's deception. But today, I was the architect of justice. My bridesmaids caught up with me in the bridal suite, their faces a mix of shock, admiration, and concern. "Emma, Sarah said, slightly breathless. Holy shit. Holy shit. Are you okay? Asked my sister Lisa, who'd been my maid of honor's counterpart. Because that was incredible, but are you okay? I looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was still perfect, my hair still in place, my dress still pristine white. I looked like a bride who'd just had the wedding of her dreams. I've never been better, I said, and I meant it. Now help me out of this dress. I want to change into something more appropriate for a revenge party. The dress I'd chosen for the reception was black, symbolically appropriate, I thought, and elegant enough to make it clear that I was the hostess of this event, not its victim. When I walked into the reception hall, a cheer went up from the guests who'd decided to stay, and most of them had stayed. Apparently, the spectacle of a public breakup had only whetted their appetite for more drama. The open bar probably didn't hurt either. Derek was nowhere to be seen, of course. Marcus had managed to get him out of the church and presumably somewhere he could hide his shame. Derek's parents were gone too, probably dealing with their own humiliation. Having your son exposed as a cheating liar in front of 200 people couldn't be easy, but plenty of people had remained. My family, my friends, even some of Derek's relatives who seemed more interested in the gossip than in supporting him. The band was playing, people were drinking, and the energy in the room was electric. Emma! My cousin Kate appeared at my side with a glass of champagne. Girl, you are officially my hero. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I can't believe you held it together for 3 weeks, added my college roommate Jenny. If I'd found out my fiancé was cheating, I would have burned his house down. I considered it, I said with a smile. But public humiliation seemed more fitting. The evening that followed was surreal. People kept coming up to me, congratulating me like I'd won an award instead of destroyed my relationship. They wanted to know how I'd found out, how I'd kept it secret, how I'd managed to plan such a perfect revenge. I found myself holding court like a celebrity, telling the story over and over again. The hardest part was acting normal. I explained to a group of fascinated listeners, pretending to be excited about the wedding while I was planning to ruin it. But every time I wanted to confront him, I'd remember those text messages, how they'd been laughing about how stupid I was. Did you ever think about just calling it off quietly? Someone asked. For about 5 minutes, I admitted. But then I realized that Derek had humiliated me for 8 months. He'd made me an unknowing participant in his lies. Why should I be the one to sneak away quietly? Why should I be the one to feel ashamed? Around midnight, when the party was finally winding down, I found myself alone for the first time all day. I sat in the hotel bar, still in my black dress, nursing a glass of wine and processing what I'd done. My phone had been buzzing all evening with texts and calls. Most were from friends and family, expressing their support and admiration. But there were also messages from Derek. The first few were desperate apologies, begging me to call him, to let him explain. Then they turned angry, accusing me of humiliating him unnecessarily, of destroying his reputation over one mistake. The most recent ones were from earlier in the evening, and they were different in tone. I'm with Lex now, he'd written. At least she really loves me. You never understood me the way she does. You'll regret this, Emma. You'll regret throwing away 4 years over jealousy. Hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. I stared at those messages, looking for some hint of the man I'd fallen in love with, some acknowledgement of what he'd done to me. But there was nothing. Even in his supposed apologies, he was minimizing his actions, making himself the victim. One mistake. 8 months of lies was one mistake. Over jealousy. Discovering your fiancé's affair was just jealousy. You got what you wanted. As if I'd wanted to discover that the man I loved was a liar and a cheat. I deleted the messages without responding. Derek had made his choice 8 months ago when he started his affair. I'd simply made mine 3 weeks ago when I decided he would face consequences for that choice. But even as I deleted his messages, I couldn't delete the hurt. The revenge had been satisfying, yes, but it didn't erase the pain of betrayal. It didn't bring back the man I'd thought I was in love with, the man who'd apparently never existed at all. Rough night? I looked up to see Jake, one of Derek's co-workers who'd stayed for the reception. He was a nice guy, someone I'd always gotten along with at company parties. Actually, no, I said. Tonight's been surprisingly good. It's the last 8 months that were rough. Jake sat down beside me without invitation. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Derek's been acting different lately. Distracted, secretive. A few of us wondered if something was going on. Really? Really. And honestly, after what you revealed today, some things are starting to make sense. All those times he couldn't make it to company events? All those mysterious phone calls he'd take outside the office? Jake shook his head. I'm sorry, Emma. You deserved better. It was the first time someone had acknowledged my pain instead of just marveling at my revenge. I felt tears prick at my eyes for the first time since that morning. The worst part, I found myself saying, is that I really loved him. The man I thought he was anyway. I was so excited to marry him, to build a life with him. And now I find out that man never existed. Jake nodded. That's the hardest part about betrayal. It's not just losing the person you're with. It's realizing you never really knew them at all. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last of the reception guests filter out of the hotel. What are you going to do now? Jake asked. It was a question I'd been avoiding all evening. What was I going to do now? I'd spent 3 weeks planning Derek's destruction, but I hadn't thought much about what came after. The apartment we shared, the life we'd built together, the future I'd imagined, all of that was gone now. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I'll figure it out as I go. Jake smiled. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're going to be just fine. Anyone who can plan and execute a revenge like that is definitely going to land on her feet. After Jake left, I went back to my hotel room and finally allowed myself to cry. Not the desperate, heartbroken sobs of 3 weeks ago, but cleaner tears. Tears for the end of a chapter, for the loss of a future I'd wanted, for the pain of being betrayed by someone I'd trusted completely. But mixed in with the sadness was something else. Relief. Relief that I'd finally stood up for myself. Relief that I'd refused to be the victim. Relief that Derek's lies were finally out in the open where they belonged. I woke up the next morning to find that my phone had exploded with notifications. Text messages, Facebook comments, Instagram tags. Apparently, several people had posted videos of my wedding day revelation, and they were going viral. Emma Sullivan destroys cheating fiancé at the altar. Read one headline. Bride's revenge goes viral after catching fiancé's affair. Read another. There were hundreds of comments, mostly supportive but some critical. Some people thought I was a hero for standing up for myself. Others thought I should have handled it privately. A few suggested that I must have been a terrible girlfriend to drive Derek to cheat. Those last comments stung, but I'd expected them. There's always someone ready to blame the woman when a man cheats. It's easier than accepting that some people are just selfish and dishonest. My phone rang, and I saw it was my mother. Emma, honey, she said as soon as I answered. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Mom. Really? I've been so worried about you. Yesterday was, well, it was a lot. I know it wasn't what you expected, I said. I'm sorry you had to witness all that. Sorry? My mother's voice was sharp. Emma, you have nothing to be sorry for. What Derek did to you was unforgivable. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Really? Really? I'll admit I was shocked by how you handled it. But after I had time to think about it, I realized that you did exactly what you should have done. Derek deserved to be exposed for what he was. Your father agrees, by the way, she continued. He said any man who would cheat on his daughter deserves whatever he gets. The support from my parents meant more than I'd expected. I'd been so focused on the revenge that I hadn't considered how my family would react to my methods. Over the next few days, the story continued to spread. Local news stations picked it up, then national ones. I received interview requests from talk shows and magazines. My 15 minutes of fame, apparently, for humiliating my cheating fiancé. I turned down most of the requests. I'd said what I needed to say at that altar. I didn't need to relive it for entertainment value. But I did agree to one interview with a women's magazine that wanted to focus on the issue of infidelity and women's responses to betrayal. I thought it might help other women who were going through similar situations. Do you regret how you handled it? The interviewer asked. I considered the question carefully. I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that Derek put me in a position where I felt that public humiliation was the only way to get justice. But no, I don't regret exposing him. He spent 8 months lying to me, to his family, to everyone we knew. He deserved to have his lies exposed just as publicly as he'd been telling them. What would you say to other women who discover their partners are cheating? I'd say that you don't have to be the accommodating victim. You don't have to protect your cheating partner's reputation at the expense of your own dignity. You don't have to sneak away quietly and let them control the narrative. But I'd also say that revenge isn't for everyone. What I did worked for me in my situation, but every woman has to decide what's right for her. The interview ran with the headline, "The Bride Who Refused to Be a Victim," and I was pleased with how it turned out. The focus was on empowerment rather than just the spectacle of what I'd done. Meanwhile, Derek had apparently gone into hiding. He'd moved in with Lex, according to mutual friends, and was avoiding any public places where he might run into people who'd witnessed his humiliation. His social media accounts had been deactivated, and he'd even taken time off work to avoid the gossip. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I'd remember those text messages, the casual way he'd discussed deceiving me, the months of lies he'd told without apparent remorse. I'd remember how he'd looked so happy on our wedding day, probably thinking about how he was going to have his cake and eat it too, a wife for stability and a girlfriend for excitement. Derek had made his choices. Now he was living with the consequences. As for me, I was discovering that life after revenge was both easier and harder than I'd expected. Easier because I no longer had to pretend to be happy in a relationship built on lies. Harder because I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I moved out of the apartment Derek and I had shared, finding a small place across town. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep busy and to rebuild my savings after the costly wedding that never happened. I started therapy to process the betrayal and to figure out how to trust again. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Tell me about the revenge," she said during our first session. "How did planning and executing it make you feel?" "Powerful," I said immediately. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had control over my own life. And now, I thought about it. Now I feel empty, I guess. Like I accomplished what I set out to do, but I'm not sure what comes next. "That's normal, Doctor," Martinez said. "Revenge can be satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't actually heal the underlying wound. It doesn't bring back what was lost or undo what was done. So was I wrong to do it?" "I didn't say that. I think you did what you felt you needed to do to reclaim your power in an impossible situation. But now you need to focus on healing, not just revenge." Over the following months, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Derek. I pursued hobbies I'd abandoned. I started dating again, though cautiously. The first man I went out with was Jake, Derek's former coworker. It was just coffee. Nothing serious, but it felt good to be with someone who knew the whole story and didn't judge me for how I'd handled it. "You know," Jake said as we walked through the park after coffee, "I always thought you were too good for Derek. Even before I knew about the cheating." "Really? Really? You're kind, smart, funny. You deserve someone who appreciates those qualities instead of taking them for granted." It was the first time in months that I'd felt genuinely attractive to someone, genuinely valued. With Derek, I'd spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to be enough, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated for who I actually was. Jake and I didn't become serious. We were both dealing with our own issues, but those early dates reminded me that I was worthy of love. Real love, not the conditional, deceptive kind Derek had offered. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I ran into Derek at a grocery store. I was picking up wine for a dinner party when I saw him in the produce section, looking thinner and older than I remembered. Our eyes met across the lettuce display, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then Derek approached me, slowly, like he was afraid I might run away. "Emma," he said quietly. "Hi, Derek." I was surprised by how calm I felt. 6 months ago, seeing him would have sent me into a rage. Now I just felt nothing. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. "Really good." Derek nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I've been wanting to talk to you, to apologize. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry." "Okay," I said simply. Derek seemed to expect more of a response. When I didn't elaborate, he continued, "I know you're probably still angry." "I'm not angry," I interrupted. "I was angry 6 months ago. Now I'm just indifferent." That seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. His face fell, and I realized that some part of him had been hoping I was still consumed with thoughts of him, even if they were negative thoughts. "I heard you're with Lex," I said. Derek's expression darkened. "We broke up. Turns out she wasn't interested in a relationship with someone whose reputation was ruined. She liked the excitement of being the other woman, but she didn't want to deal with the consequences." I felt a small spark of satisfaction at that news, but it was fleeting. Derek's relationship with Lex wasn't my problem anymore. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't really. "Emma," Derek said desperately, "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that I regret everything. I regret the affair, I regret the lies, I regret losing you." I looked at him. This man I'd once loved so completely and felt nothing but pity. Derek, I'm sure you do regret it, but not because you hurt me. You regret it because you got caught. You regret it because there were consequences. That's not true. It is true, I said firmly. If you'd really regretted it, you would have ended the affair months ago. You would have come clean before our wedding. You only regret it now because your perfect plan to have both of us fell apart. Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Because I was right, and we both knew it. I have to go, I said, turning to leave. I hope you figure out how to be a better person, Derek. For your own sake. I walked away without looking back, and I felt the last of my anger toward Derek dissolve. He wasn't worth my anger anymore. He wasn't worth any of my emotions. That night, I called Dr. Martinez and told her about the encounter. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I said immediately. Like I've finally let go of the last piece of that relationship. That's significant progress, Emma. It sounds like you've moved from anger to acceptance. I think I have. And you know what? I'm grateful for what happened. Grateful? Grateful that I found out before I actually married him. Grateful that I learned I was strong enough to stand up for myself. Grateful that I didn't waste any more years on someone who didn't value me. That's a very healthy way to look at it. I agreed. For the first time since discovering Derek's affair, I felt truly at peace with what had happened. Not just the revenge, though I still didn't regret that, but the entire experience. It had taught me things about myself I never would have learned otherwise. A year after the wedding that never was, I was in a completely different place. I'd gotten a promotion at work, moved to a new apartment I absolutely loved, and was dating someone who treated me with the respect and honesty I deserved. My new boyfriend, Marcus, not Derek's former best man, but a different Marcus I'd met through friends, knew the whole story of my failed wedding. He'd seen the viral videos, read the news articles, heard the gossip, and he thought what I'd done was brilliant. You stood up for yourself, he said one evening as we watched the sunset from my apartment balcony. You refused to be victimized. That takes incredible strength. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, I admitted. If I should have just walked away quietly, Marcus shook his head. Emma, that man lied to you for 8 months. He made you an unknowing participant in his deception. He was planning to use you as a cover story while he figured out how to be with someone else. You gave him exactly what he deserved. I leaned against Marcus's shoulder, feeling grateful for his perspective. It was nice to be with someone who saw my strength instead of my flaws, who understood that standing up for myself wasn't the same as being vindictive. Besides, Marcus added with a grin, it was epic. I've never seen a more perfect example of poetic justice. I laughed, remembering the satisfaction I'd felt when Derek's face went white as I read those text messages. It had been epic. It had been perfect. It had been exactly what Derek deserved. But more than that, it had been the moment I reclaimed my power. The moment I stopped being the accommodating victim and became the architect of my own justice. 2 years later, I was planning another wedding. This time, though, I was planning it with someone who loved me completely, honestly, and faithfully. Someone who would never dream of betraying me because he understood that trust was the foundation of real love. The night before my actual wedding, the one that would actually happen, I found myself thinking about Derek, not with anger or hurt, but with something like gratitude. His betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been a gift. It had shown me what I wouldn't accept, what I was worth, and what real love looked like. I never heard from Derek again after that encounter in the grocery store. Through mutual friends, I learned that he'd eventually moved to another city, presumably to escape the reputation he'd earned. I hoped he'd learned something from the experience, but honestly, I didn't much care either way. Derek was my past. Marcus was my future. And I was finally completely happy. Standing at the altar on my real wedding day, looking into the eyes of a man who loved me enough to be honest with me, I thought about the difference between the woman I'd been 2 years ago and the woman I was now. The old Emma had been accommodating, trusting to a fault, willing to accept less than she deserved. The new Emma knew her worth and refused to settle for anything less than real love. The old Emma had been a victim. The new Emma was a survivor. And as I said, I do, to the man who'd earned the right to hear those words, I silently thanked the old Emma for finding the strength to stand up for herself when it mattered most. That moment of revenge had been the catalyst for everything good that had come after. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. But sometimes, the best revenge is making sure that the person who wronged you faces consequences for their actions. And sometimes, the best revenge is discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined you could be. I'd gotten all three, and I'd never been happier.